so I don't strain my voice too. You know what happens when you start yelling in this cold weather? I'll lose my voice here. But well, good afternoon. And welcome to Antietam National Battlefield. My name's Mike Gamble, and this is our annual Irish Brigade hike. How many have done this before? A few of you have. Okay. Always like to see some new folks. Those that come back every year, they hear the same stories and so forth. Maybe you get a little bored with that, but the new people, it'll be new to you. But again, welcome. Couple of things here. First of all, when we schedule this program, we never know what's going to happen in March. So just a few days ago, it was 60 degrees. It was a little bit of a breeze, but it was just beautiful, nice, kind of early spring weather. Well, you know what we're going to have to contend with here today. So I want to make sure that you all, as we get out there in the field, that you're prepared. You've got, you know, adequate layered clothing on, and that I'm going to rely on you to know how you feel about being out there and walking in this weather. But as long as it's not breezy, I think we'll be okay. But I don't think we're good. Well, anyway. So as you look at the map, you can see that we're going to go toward the Muma Farm and the Roulette Farm. So when we get down in lower elevation, maybe we'll get a little bit of a break from the weather. But today we are looking at the Irish Brigade. This is not an orientation to the entire battle. We're looking at one of 100 brigades that were involved in action here today. And why the Irish Brigade? Because it's St. Patrick's Day last Friday, right? And I was especially interested in doing it this year. I mean, I've been doing it, but my daughter gave me this Ancestry.com search, you know, so I did do my DNA and found out that my grandfather, I knew he was from Scotland, but his mom, her maiden name was McGinty. Now, you don't get any more Irish than that. So I think there was some cross-pollination there with Scotland and Northern Ireland, and so, you know, us West Virginians, you know, we're the only state that is entirely in Appalachia. So you're going to find a lot of Scotch-Irish going through West Virginia and further south into, you know, North Carolina and so forth and so on. But we're going to look at the Irish Brigade. We're also going to look at its famous commanding officer, Thomas Francis Meagher. There's a color photo of one of the many uniforms that he liked to wear. Now this guy, I mean, you can't help but like this guy. He was so full of himself, you know what I'm saying? I mean, he had so many skills. He had this courage as a young man to do what he could to try to start that movement to get Ireland out from the yoke of British rule, English rule. Ireland had been going through some very, very bad times, you know, 1830s, 1840s, the potato famine and so forth. Now, this fellow though, Thomas Francis Meagher, he came from money. He went to private school. He went to college. And you would think with all those advantages, maybe he would direct himself maybe to something a little bit more lucrative. No, you've got to give him his props. The Young Irish movement came into focus there in the 1840s. He got aligned with some of the Irish leaders and became known actually as not only a hero in Ireland, but in the future he'll be a hero here in the United States. There is a monument to his memory there in Waterford, Ireland, and also a monument to his memory in Helena, Montana, as the first territorial governor of Montana. And of course, we're going to be over here near the tower. One of my if not my favorite monument here, the Irish Brigade monument. The stone for the monument that was placed here is from County Wicklow in Ireland. So he's all over the place. Even spent some time in Tasmania. I'll tell you a little bit about that. But Thomas Francis Meagher, young guy, born 1823. So that makes him, let's say in 1862, he would have been what? Let's see, 33, 43, 53, in the early 40s, something like that. Of course, he wasn't successful in getting the movement started to free Ireland or get it started to become a republic. He was behind actually the first flag to be flown in Ireland, and I brought the Irish flag with me today. And as you look at the Irish flag, you notice the three colors there, and of course the green mainly for the Catholic heritage, the orange for the Protestant, and then the white bringing the two groups together. So it was his dream that he could bring both those entities, the Catholics and the Protestants, together, and then Ireland would free itself before everybody left for America. I think the latest stats I saw was close to 2 million actually left Ireland for the United States. The Fenians would have a, oops, I'm sorry, I always do that. The Fenians was a group of Irish Americans that were totally for supporting any movement to free Ireland from England. And he was definitely aligned himself with the Fenians. And you'll hear me mention a little bit about the Irish Brigade. When they went into battle, when they joined up, did they really fight for the United States? Well, certainly they did. They gave up buckets of blood for the United States. But also, there is this still tie to Ireland that they would eventually get all of those good military skills, their organization, their officers, a core group of good military veterans. Maybe they would invade Canada, hold Canada hostage, and then Ireland would get its freedom. So there was still that tie to the mother country. When we think of what the Irish had to compete for, discrimination, of course, was rampant. There was this feeling in the United States, 1840s politically, that these Irish immigrants were those that were taking jobs away from other Americans. They weren't really Americans. You'll even see this in the Irish Brigade. There were 4 regiments here at the Battle of Antietam, and one of the regiments was not an Irish Brigade regiment. It was the 29th Massachusetts. And when I was reading the background of the 29th Massachusetts, they said they were real Americans. They came from Pilgrim stock. They came over on the Mayflower. So there was still this idea, who's real Americans and who are Americans? So they had, the Irish Brigade, the soldiers had something to prove. They wanted to show to the country, politically, whatnot, that they were willing to fight and die for their adopted country. I brought a quote. I found this quote in my research, and it was an Irish soldier who was being criticized by his dear beloved mother about, why do you want to join the Union Army? And this is what he said. He said, you, his mother, you are not a fit subject to live in a free and prosperous country. Ireland is the place for those who possess such sentiments. There is where the iron heel of despotism grinds the patriot heart. So there was this fierce determination when you look at the motivation of the Irish Brigade and the soldiers. Now, When we think of the Irish Brigade, we think of these regiments that were part of the militia there in New York City. The 69th New York comes to mind, the 69th Irish Militia, which again I look back and I wondered, how did they get permission or how did they get the approval to get a military unit? Well, they were able to do a lot of things politically. But Michael Corcoran had organized this militia in New York City. And in 1860, lo and behold, the Prince of Wales was visiting. The Prince of Wales. And so they were going to have this grand parade in New York City. But when Colonel Corcoran got wind of what was happening, and then he got an official invitation, he says in a written letter, we will not be marching in honor of the Prince of Wales because of their fierce patriotism to their mother country. So there was this move, they were going to disband the 69th New York. But what saved them was the United States Civil War. So when they needed soldiers. So one of the leaders in the 69th New York was Meagher. Meagher, well, he was arrested by the Brits. He was sentenced for high treason. His sentence was to be hung, drawn, and quartered, and then be beheaded. And then the parts of his body would be sent to the different places in the realm. So, you know, what would you think if you heard that, the young guy that he'd be hung, drawn, and quartered? Well, Queen Victoria took pity on the young man and sent him to Tasmania. Now, Tasmania, next to Australia, there were 65,000 people there. Of that, about 30-some thousand were prisoners. And they were sent there. They had their little plot of land. Nobody there guarding them figured that they would be, you know, how would they escape? Well, Meagher warned his captors that he was thinking of escaping because he was duty-bound not to escape. That was part of the agreement. But he did escape. He found his way to the United States. Eventually, he made his way to New York City. Now, this fella had great oratorical skills. He could get a group motivated. He could talk about of course, the English, but he could also just had those, you know, someone that could get people riled up, okay? And he had definitely those skills. He was also a poet. He was also a lawyer. He wrote for the Irish American News. This guy got around quite a bit. When Dan Sickles shot his wife's lover there in the 1850s, they brought him up on charges of murder. Shot his wife. Well, Meagher became part of the Dream Team. Why? He didn't really get up and defend Dan Sickles, who, of course, you know, later became a Union general. Lost his leg there at Gettysburg. But they wanted Meagher to sit there at the defendant's table because they knew that there were jurors sitting there in judgment of Sickles that would see Meagher and know that he was an Irish leader and they were Irish, and if he said something they would believe it. So that was his claim there, that the community knew that. Well, at first Meagher says, you know, I don't know whether I should support the Confederacy or the Union, because this idea of people fighting for so-called independence, that always struck the Irish, you know, there's this group fighting for independence. But then after thinking of where the future lay and so forth, he did turn his allegiance to the United States, and he helped form up one of the companies of the 69th New York, Company K. He had them all dressed out in zouave uniforms. The 69th was brigaded under this commanding officer by the name of William Tecumseh Sherman. They march off to Washington, D.C., and eventually they're involved in the First Battle of Manassas. The First Battle of Manassas, their leader of their brigade, Corcoran, is captured by the Confederates. Sherman did not have a lot of good things to say about the Irish Brigade. He thought that, I think that was part of his views. He was very discriminatory against the Irish. I don't think they could do anything right. But later on you'll see this feud between Sherman and Meagher. Well, the idea when they got back to New York City was that in terms of what Meagher was looking at is to form an Irish Brigade. So they were thinking about who would command this brigade. And this fellow's name came out as James Shields, who was in the U.S. Army. He was a general. But Shields wanted to have division command. He didn't want to just command a brigade. So as the War Department considered who could be commanding the brigade, they knew that Meagher had the skills to recruit and get soldiers to sign up. So Brigadier General Thomas Francis Meagher. Did he have much of a military background to command a brigade into battle? No. He didn't have really much tactical training, but he would have the courage to be in front of his troops and yell out, "Follow me," on top of a white horse. He would do that. So there's no question that he had the bravery. But as far as maybe the tactical training to know how to consider different strategies and so forth, not so much. The Irish Brigade will get involved in the Peninsula Campaign. They will prove themselves worthy soldiers. As McClellan retreats back to Alexandria, we have now Lee deciding to institute his Maryland campaign after the Second Battle of Manassas, 20 miles west of Washington, D.C. And so Lee feels it's the most propitious time to bring his army up from Maryland into Pennsylvania. His first invasion of the North. Bring the war to the northern people, he says. If we win this next battle in a northern state, we will convince the northern people that with elections coming up, that it's time to negotiate. It's time that we consider what the Confederates need and have a negotiated settlement because they're winning and they keep winning. And England might recognize the Confederacy if they keep winning. The foreign minister and prime minister writing letters to each other considering now's the time to recognize the Confederacy. Getting the war out of Virginia, that was important. So for all of these reasons, Lee crosses the Potomac River right outside of Leesburg, Virginia. His army begins moving into Frederick, Maryland, September the 4th. Frederick is on the other side of that far ridge that you see in the distance there. That is called South Mountain. South Mountain extends from Pennsylvania to the north of us to the Potomac River, which is about 4 miles south of Sharpsburg. His plan, Lee's plan, is to come over that ridge through the gaps into the Cumberland Valley and head up north. His supply lines reach down into the Shenandoah Valley, and he's got the problem that he has to take care of down there. Harper's Ferry, 12,000 Union troops down in Harper's Ferry. Jackson's ordered, Stonewall Jackson ordered to take almost 3/4 of the Confederate Army, capture Harper's Ferry. The rest of the Confederates will be up there on the high ground waiting to see what Jackson can do. Jackson will take more time than what was planned, but as he is getting Jackson and his troops in position, General McClellan is brought back to save the Republic. George B. McClellan, 35-year-old general. Lincoln says the troops love him. They'll listen to him. He got the army organized at the beginning of the Civil War. So, needless to say, to his credit, he reorganizes the Union Army and he responds quickly to stop the Confederate invasion. September the 14th, up there on top of the ridge, the Battle of South Mountain. Lee's troops that were not in Harper's Ferry are up there. They're outnumbered 2-1. By the evening of the 14th, they're in full retreat. They're heading for the Potomac River, south of Sharpsburg. But on the 15th, the good people here in Sharpsburg, Maryland, they see the Confederates coming into their village. It looks as though they're just going to come through and then head back into Virginia. But Lee gets a message. The garrison down at Harper's Ferry, 12,000 Union soldiers, they've all surrendered. With that, Lee decides to bring the battle here to Sharpsburg. He's got the Antietam Creek, 1.5 miles to the east of us, Potomac River, 2 miles to the west of us. He's got good high ground around Sharpsburg for his artillery. He feels so confident in his troops that he feels that he could win this battle. And this would be probably the best step that he could take to end the war right here in Sharpsburg. He'll be outnumbered almost 2 to 1. McClellan will have close to 86,000 men. The Confederates will have, we're going to say, a little bit between 45,000 men. But we'll see the Confederates still making their way up from Harper's Ferry even during the afternoon of this battle. So when the battle kicks off, Lee's going to be very much outnumbered. McClellan thinks he's outnumbered. He's told that Lee has close to 110,000 men. Well, he didn't have 110,000 men, but that's what he's been told. So he doesn't attack until the morning of the 17th. During the morning of the 17th, most of the fighting will be up here in the cornfield. The cornfield will exchange hands at stop 4. Miller's cornfield will exchange hands 4 times. By 7 o'clock, the Confederates mount a counterattack, driving the Union 1st Corps back. Then the Union 12th Corps arrives. They drive the Confederates back into the west woods around the Duncan Church. By 9 o'clock, the 2nd Corps finally has their orders to go into battle. Edwin Vose Sumner is their commanding officer. There he is, 65-year-old general. When I first started working here, I thought, 65 years old, that's an old guy. Don't think that much now. But yes, 65-year-old general, most of his adult life has been in the Army, was not a West Point graduate. He'd been out west fighting the Comanches. He was a dragoons officer. And he's chomping at the bit to get into battle. He's got 15,000 men under his command. 2nd Corps, 3 divisions. But in the Civil War, 15,000 men did not march the same time all together. A lot of, we have to kind of break loose of our 21st century hindsight here. He will be with the Lee division, John Sedgwick's division. The other 2 divisions, French and Richardson, will follow, but they're not going to be close up with him. Should he wait? Should he attack? He and his staff gets up here where the intersection is with the Smoketown Road and the Muma Farm lane. By 9 o'clock, he sees this is under Union control. The Confederates have been pushed back into the tree line there. The Confederates have been rousted out of the cornfield. He says it's time to attack with 1 division, Sedgwick's division, about 4,500 men. They line up their 3 brigades and they, shoulder to shoulder, begin moving toward the west woods to move those Confederates out of there, do a roundabout to the left. That's the plan. Little did they know that they were marching into what later historians will describe as the West Woods Massacre. Arriving to support Jackson, who was in charge of that part of the Confederate line of battle, Lee has moved troops from one end of the battlefield running through town to help out. Also, Confederates have starting to arrive from Harper's Ferry. They are sent over there. Sedgwick goes into those tree lines there, and eventually he'll get hit from 3 different directions by rifle and artillery fire. Sumner says in his loud, booming voice, "My God, boys, we're in a terrible fix." Bull Sumner is in trouble. They called him Bull because in the Mexican War they said a bullet bounced off his noggin. I think that was just because he was kind of stubborn. But to his credit, he gets those men out of the West Woods. But the other 2 divisions, that's where we're going to pick up the story with the Irish Brigade. French and Richardson, those were the other 2 divisions. When they begin arriving, they're not going to follow Sedgwick over there. They're going to take a left-hand turn and they're going to head to the flank of Sedgwick, and that will take them to their appointment with destiny down here in the Sunken Road. So to begin things off, what we're going to do, we're going to walk from here down to the Muma Farm. I'm going to let Jill. Thank you, Jill. Jill Black is our intern from Shepherd College, or Shepherd University, excuse me. Both my daughters went there, so I'm still thinking of Shepherd College. Taking the flag staff, but we're going to keep the Irish Brigade. Who would like to be our color bearer here?
I'll do it.
We had
Thankfully,
one regiment, the 63rd, lost 16 color bearers. The 69th, I think they lost 8 color bearers. So I don't know, your future is in doubt.
Gotta follow me.
Well, let me pull that out a little bit. Let's look at again, the Irish Brigade just had this panache, right? Look what's on their flag. Now this is not an exact replica, I know that. But on it you can see the Irish symbols, the 69th in this case, the golden harp, the shamrocks, the cloudburst, and the Gaelic writing, "From the clash of spears we will not retreat." That's what it says in Gaelic. And the huge flag, after this battle, the flags were so damaged that they had to replace them. So for the 69th, well, where do you go in New York City to replace your precious flag? Well, you go to Tiffany's. And so they had their new flag from Tiffany's. In 1963, John F. Kennedy visited his ancestral home, and at that point he gave a speech at their, would that be their parliament? Or
yeah, you're wrong.
And he returned, or he didn't return it, he presented the flag as the gift from Irish America, the United States, back to Ireland, and it's still on display from what you were telling me. So okay, we're ready to head off. Okay, it's not too bad. Show this photo. Antietam was the first Civil War battle that photos were taken before the dead were all buried. And there will be 4,000 soldiers that will die on this one day of battle. This is the bloodiest one day in American history. 17,000 wounded, the rest missing. We figure about 3,000 died of their wounds in the months following this battle. So on the day of battle, 4,000 soldiers. The evening of the 17th, both sides find out how many men they still have left. The next day, Lee stays, McClellan stays. Lee goes back to Virginia on the evening of the following day. So the dead, who's going to bury the dead? Well, the Union Army will stay here for about 6 weeks. So they will bury their dead first. They will bury their dead first. In the Roulette Farm, where we're going to go here eventually, there will be close to 700 bodies buried. We have a map that was found in the New York Public Library a few years back that shows on the map where the bodies were buried directly after the battle. Confederate dead, for the most part, will have to wait their turn not only in 1862, but even after the Civil War, when they began exhuming the dead and moving the bodies to the cemetery here in Sharpsburg. But that doesn't occur until 1865 is when they start digging up the bodies. But here we are standing basically where you see the bodies that were gathered here. Right here in this slope that goes up toward where you see those trees, right up here in that area there by those limestone outcroppings there. So you're standing basically where they've gathered the bodies like raking leaves, bringing them together and then digging burial pits. Union bodies, for the most part, were in individual graves. Confederates will be buried in mass graves with perhaps a wooden sign on top indicating here lies 600 bodies or whatnot. Eventually all the Union dead, not only at this battle, but also Harper's Ferry, and later, of course, there was Monocacy. But any Civil War battle in the area, Union dead will be reburied over here in the National Cemetery. It's dedicated in 1867. But as late as 2008, we were still finding body remains of a Civil War soldier. In the field north of the cornfield, visitors such as yourself saw bones around a groundhog hole, showed them to the visitor center. They were human bones. Long story short, we got our archaeologists, they did the dig. They found the remains of what they determined to be an 18-year-old Union soldier. They found his teeth in the jawbone. They found parts of his skull that were blown apart with a bullet coming in the front of his head. They found his belt buckle, and they found buttons, and on the buttons it had the seal of the state of New York. And that same seal is up there on that monument there. The Adjutant General of the state of New York requested that the remains be brought back to New York, and that's where they were reburied. So, when you consider, when you visit this battlefield, I know some of you have been here quite a bit and so forth, there could still be probably the remains. You know, when they paid these day laborers, they gave them a bounty, and so the bounty was for larger bones. Now, if they were smaller bones, they didn't get any money for that. The Irish Brigade, soldiers from the 88th New York, remains, we figure they were from the 88th New York because of the location of where these small bones were located. I'm going to show you where they found those bones here as part of my program here today. So, what we're going to do, we're going to go on down to the Muma Farm. You'll notice the aroma here. Yeah. The other day, somebody ran over a skunk, and then we had the manure. I'm telling you, it was a plethora of smells around here. Plethora. But anyway, I went out and checked this morning just to see where are they spreading that stuff, and I think we'll be safe, so we'll be flexible, you know. But if anybody says, hey, wait a minute, we're in the middle of all this manure pile, you know, we can be flexible. So, follow me. But the fence here, proud parents of 13 children. Elizabeth was his second wife, so he had children from his first marriage and his second marriage. The youngest was Corvette. She was still an infant. But this was a prosperous farm, the Mumas. They actually gave the land to the Dunkers to build their church. They were members of the Dunker Church. On September the 14th, up there on top of South Mountain, when the battle was raging, they were having services at the Dunker Church, the German Baptist Brethren. They called them the Dunkers. I don't know if they appreciated that name or not. It's from a German word, Tunker, meaning full immersion. The Father and the Son, and the Holy, you know, 3 times. So after services that were pretty long, which is ironic, the elder of the Dunkers, his last name was Long. But anyway, after the services, Mr. Muma, as was custom, invited a lot of the folks to come to his farm here and, you know, for lunch. And but when they got here, they started hearing the sounds of the artillery up there on top of the South Mountain. One of the children said that they thought it was going to rain because they heard the thunder. So they knew that they were in danger, and so they will leave. As many of the folks around here got out of here as quickly as possible. Those that lived on this end of Sharpsburg went north. About 6 miles up the road there was another Brethren church called the Manor Church. And that's where the Mumas went. Although a couple of his oldest sons, they did come back to see if they could still get some of their valuables they get caught by the Confederates, and they get accused of being spies. But when they look at their age, the Confederates, they let them go. So the Mumas, then they had left. But during the very violent episode of this battle in the early morning, the battle begins at 6 in the morning. The Confederates, under Roswell Ripley, his brigade, mostly North Carolinians, they had this end of their line where the farm buildings were part of their line of battle. And Roswell Ripley was very concerned that if the buildings fell in the hands of the Union soldiers, they would take advantage of those roofs and get up on the roofs and have better aim at their men. The sharpshooters would get up there and play havoc with the officers. When you study this battle, you will see that the officers will take heavy casualties. And this may also stand to reason why there was so much confusion as you see the troop movements as they're making going from point A to point B. Is their leaders, their officers. There will be 6 generals that will die from their wounds here, 3 Union, 3 Confederate, brigade commanders. The soldiers expected the leaders to lead from the front. That's how they respected their leaders. If they were behind, now we're not talking about Lee and Jackson and Longstreet, but at the brigade level, even at the division level, definitely at the company level, they wanted to see their officers lead from the front. So when you think about that, especially not only being in front, but also being on top of a horse, the other side's got to see you as, yes, a target. So, yes, so maybe you've got a little bit of extra pay being an officer, but take that with the knowledge that you're going to be out there. If you expect the men to respect you, okay? So, the 3rd North Carolina, Colonel D. Rossett was given the order to get some volunteers and burn the main house to the ground. And that's what they did. They lit the torches, they threw them through the 2nd-story window, they caught with the bedding, and pretty soon the whole house went up in flames. Now, they didn't burn the barn. The barn was destroyed, though, by a fire because of artillery shells. The only building that actually survived was the spring house right here. So that was here during the battle. If we were able to get in there, you could see the water, a nice little flowing spring that would come through here down toward the Roulette Farm. I had the pleasure of knowing a direct descendant of the Muma family. Ike, he was our custodian for several years. He's been retired now for about 5 years. Ike Muma, great guy. Now, I'll tell you what his character is like. You meet people all the time and you think about them. This guy had the dream job. He was in Alaska tagging bears, working for Fish and Wildlife. And, living, he was a big guy, looked like a bear himself. Well, his dad, Wilbur, who lived in town after Ike's mom died, he came to take care of Wilbur, his dad, who eventually passed, and then he worked here. But there was a picture of his great-grandparents, Samuel and Elizabeth, in the visitor center. So every day he would come to work, right there on the wall would be his great-grandparents. He made it extra sure that. Now, who did the damage? Of course, the Confederates did the damage. The Roulettes, they got some money for damages. They made claims to the Federal Survey Party about damages that the federal forces took. But the Mumas, when they attempted to get some damages, they had to prove that the Union Army had done it. Well, they did. The Confederates had done it. So they were out. They did not receive any compensation. In 1906, the postmaster in Sharpsburg got a letter. I got a copy of it right here. I made a copy of it. and it was a letter, and it was stamped from John Clark. He owned a feed store in New Bern, North Carolina. He was a sergeant major in the 3rd North Carolina. It's 1906. Now he's up in years, right? So I keep thinking, he must have been thinking about writing this letter for a long, long time. He writes a letter to the postmaster, would you please tell me who lived in the house that we had to burn to the ground? So many words. The postmaster looked at that, and he knew exactly who lived there because he was Sam Muma Jr. And so he sent a letter back and invited him to come to Sharpsburg, and he sent him some postcards. And so he did come, and he said to Mr. Clark, you were following orders, so if you feel that, a sense of guilt and whatnot. But early in the Civil War, you didn't find that much of the farms being burnt to the ground. You definitely will later on. Shenandoah Valley, up here in Pennsylvania, Chambersburg. And so by the end of the Civil War, this total war, civilians will take heavy, heavy losses in property and life, and their whole life will be changed because of the war. And so you saw the beginnings of that here. When Ike retired, he said he was going to go to the superintendent and ask him if his compensation check has arrived. So we're going to go down to the Roulette Farm now. I have a question. Okay, I feel like I kind of jumped to get the both sides here. Now, Harper's Ferry surrendered on September the 15th. 12,000 Union soldiers surrendered to Stonewall Jackson. So Lee orders Jackson to get up here from Harper's Ferry and rejoin the rest of the Confederate Army. I think I kind of went by that, got off on a tangent on something else. So Jackson had arrived by midday on the 16th, and as I mentioned before, the battle started on the 17th. So again, most of the fighting up to the north during a 3-hour period. We like to say around the cornfield up there, one American soldier killed or wounded there about every 2 seconds during the first 3 hours of this battle. So now we're looking at what we normally would say the midday phase of the battle. And basically the other 2 divisions of Sumner's 2nd Corps, French and Richardson. The Richardson's division is where the Irish Brigade was. But this is the Roulette Farm right here. William and Margaret Roulette lived here with their 6 kids. The youngest was about a year old, Carrie May. This is a photo of William Roulette in later years. He's in his early 30s, but one of the county commissioners here in Washington County. So he was involved. If you're the county commissioner, you're kind of an important person, aren't you? At least, I got it. So, everybody knows that lived here, they better do either go north or go south. So the Roulettes, they joined the Mumas and they headed north. Along with Nancy Campbell, who worked for them. Nancy Campbell was an African-American woman who was at one point enslaved, but she had been given her papers, her manumission, but she worked for the Roulettes, And there was also a farmhand, another African-American, 15 years old, not enslaved, but working for the Roulettes. So the Roulettes get up here to the Manor Church. Mr. Roulette came back, and you wonder what he's thinking. I think he was a pretty stubborn guy. Remember, a county commissioner? Most county commissioners I know are kind of stubborn, right? So I might have to take a lozenge here, but anyway. So I have here a photo of, I think I do. have a photo taken of the back of this house. Here it is. There we go. And so you could see pretty much, or make out from where you're standing, the back of the house and so forth. And we have another photo that maybe shows it a little bit better, but back here is where Mr. Roulette kept, well, right there, I got my finger on the beehives. They raised bees for honey, you know. They did whatever they could to make money. This was a grain-based economy, hogs, cows, orchards, honey, lots of corn, wheat, barley, oats. So, William French, one of Sumner's division commanders, will begin moving, and we're going to show you exactly where he moved, but one of his regiments was the 132nd Pennsylvania. And as they were coming through behind the house, some of the shells that were directed from the Confederate batteries located to the north of the Sunken Road began firing indiscriminately shells, landing among the 132nd right here where we're standing. And naturally the shells hit those beehives. And the 132nd was in Nathan Kimball's brigade. This is what a soldier from the 132nd Pennsylvania, how he described it in his dedication speech for the regiment's monument at Antietam in 1904. In the line of advance by Kimball to attain this point, the Sunken Road, that's where the monument is, the Sunken Road, his forces had to pass through Kimball, Nathan Kimball, Union officer. His forces had to pass through the garden and yard of a residence known as the Roulette House. And in going through this place on a double quick, several beehives were upset, which caused some disorder and confusion amongst the men, especially the line of the 132nd Pennsylvania Volunteers. But the confusion caused by this accident of bees was soon straightened out by the action of the brigade commander, field, and staff of the 132nd. So they said it kind of disrupted their line of attack there for a while. I gave that some thought, and I think that's probably the first evidence of biological warfare, right there. So let's go to the front of the building. The Roulette home, this is the original house. It's went over the years since the Civil War, you know, all sorts of changes and whatnot. The Mellon Foundation, Richard King Mellon Foundation, bought the Roulette home and donated it to the park. So it was owned by the Roulette family all the way up until, pretty sure it was 1956. And then the Park Service will take over. We've done lots of things to stabilize the exterior. A lot of history here with the Roulette family. You know, the civilians here lost a lot of their property, but as far as the loss of life, not so much during the battle. There is some research that say there might be one person that might have died as a result of some of the shelling that went into Sharpsburg. But where they would suffer the most, the civilians, is after the battle. Diseases were just rampant over here, and the ones that suffered the most were the young people and the older folks, because their resistance, their antibodies to fight off infection for the young and the old, they were the weakest for the most part. And I saw this letter that Mr. Roulette, William Roulette, wrote to one of his relatives. He said, "We lost Carrie Mae the other day. She died of typhoid. His youngest daughter died. They were heartbroken. She was just learning how to talk," he said. So you had you had such conditions here that it took them years to recover. One writer said that if you were a crow flying over this part of Sharpsburg, the crow had to bring along his own supplies, or provender, I think is how they said it. But so the Mumas will move to the Sharpsburg farm. Those of you that are familiar with the battlefield, as you make your way down to the lower bridge, you'll pass by the Sharpsburg farm. So they'll stay there for a couple of years, and then they'll rebuild and then move back. Well, let's go up here. Oh, by the way, William Roulette, he comes back after he got his family to safety, and he hid in the cellar. And when the Union soldiers came through his property, one soldier said they remembered this civilian, this farmer, coming out of the cellar doors there, screaming at them, "Drive them, boys, drive them, take anything you want, but keep driving them." That's what he said. About this part of Washington County in Maryland, a slave state. At the beginning of in 1860, according to the census, there were about close to 70,000 enslaved people in Maryland. And there were slaves here in Sharpsburg. Some of those folks that saw purchasing or bidding or buying an enslaved and enslaving a person would then give them their freedom when they reached a certain age, or they allowed them to go and work for a wage at another farm, and they would pay for their own freedom. So they had kind of, in their own way, their own kind of emancipation kind of way of doing things. So you see that quite a bit. There were quite a number of freedmen that did live in Sharpsburg. We have a church in town. My brain's starting to freeze up. Folsom Chapel. That we're doing a lot of work. The foundation is having some programs there, and they've done a lot of work in the last 10 years. And that was also a schoolhouse. So they use it for both the church and for the schoolhouse. It's right into Sharpsburg there. Well, after the battle, I told you that the Roulettes, they were able to get some money for compensation. I have here an itemized list of what Mr. Roulette said he was missing. And it totals $2,468.17. So I like to think it'd be interesting to see what value he placed on his property. So let's take a guess here. What you think his horse? He had a 6-year-old horse. How much value do you think he placed on this 6-year-old horse back in 1862? $120. So I think that was a pretty good horse. The list goes on down here. 3 calves at $4 a piece. 350 pounds of bacon at 16 cents per pound. 3 barrels of flour. I'm just going through here. $6.25 a pound. 150 pounds potatoes, $1 a pound. 350 chickens. 15 cents a chicken, 25 ducks, 25 cents each. Somebody took his watch. He said it was worth $10. 8 turkeys at 50 cents each, $4. My favorite here is down at the bottom. 6 gallons of blackberry wine at $2 per gallon. I imagine that went pretty fast with the soldiers down here. Now, the division that went through here first was William French's division. So let's look up here. And if you look at your map that we handed out here at the beginning of the program, you can see the types of crops and what was grown in certain places throughout the battlefield. But the lead brigade of William French's division, William French, the soldiers called him Old Blinky because he had a tick. He'd get real excited and he'd blink both of his eyes. Old Blinky, they called him. Well, the lead brigade was Max Weber's brigade. Now, Max Weber, 1st Delaware, 5th Maryland, 4th New York, they will line up their regiments. 1st Delaware, 5th Maryland in the center. And if you see, can you make out that monument right there that I'm pointing at? That's to the 5th Maryland. So 1st Delaware, 5th Maryland, and 4th New York. And they begin moving across these fields in battle formation. Now, battle formation, when you see these soldiers in battle formation, think of two lines close together such that the line behind the front line, they're able to touch their fingertips to the soldier in front of them, like that. So as they begin moving and start receiving fire, artillery shells, because the Confederates, they had artillery and they could see them from where you can make out those trees behind the Piper Farm in the distance, about 2 miles to the north of it, or excuse me, to the south of it. So they start getting hit by artillery fire. So as one soldier would go down, then they would just close ranks, right? Close ranks. They had to have their flag, now we're not talking about the Irish Brigade at this point, but they had to have their flag in front of them. Why were flags important? Of course, you can imagine the visibility here very poor. Why? Because every weapon that was used black powder. So clouds of black powder smoke just kind of came into the area. High sulfur content, stings your eye, smell like sulfur. So you couldn't hardly see in front of you. You can't hear much. How can you hear? You've got shells flying close to where you're standing, and then when you return fire, you got that weapon, the breech right there next to your ears. So they looked for the flags. So the flags told them where they're going. And the 5th Maryland, they were right in the center. I've read this from different sources. The flag bearer, or color bearer, for the 5th Maryland was a German soldier, and one soldier said he weighed close to 300 pounds. He's a big guy, and I got to think, wait a minute. Now, we talk about rations. I mean, how many rations is this guy if you're 300 pounds? But they said he was a big fellow. Let's give him that. But he was right there. He could hold the staff like with one hand, like that. He was strong enough for that. But he's in the center, and the ends, the 4th New York, 1st Delaware, start coming closer to the line. Now, in that road, D.H. Hill, and we'll talk about him even more, D.H. Hill had 2 of his 5 brigades, Robert Rhodes and George B. Anderson. Well, Rhodes had that part of the Sunken road, and when we get up there, you'll see this. I'll remind you of that. They see Weber coming closer and closer. Now, notice the terrain. Notice how it kind of gradually goes up in elevation. You see that? Notice like a little ridge by that monument. You can't see the Sunken road. You can see a little bit of the fences right next to the Sunken road over here. So as they're coming up in elevation, and once they get up to where those trees are, their bodies are silhouetted with the sky behind them. Now this is 9:30 in the morning. Okay, so the sun rose in the east, so it's starting to come, it's not right above, but it's coming from that direction. Weber, as his men goes over the ridge, the Alabamians from Robert Rhodes's brigade will fire directly into him. Colonel John Brown Gordon said that it was a magnificent spectacle, he said. He said, what a pity it was to spoil with bullets such a scene of martial beauty. That's what he wrote in his book. He said, with all my lung power, I gave the order to fire. And that's what he did. And within 5 minutes, Max Weber lost 450 men, like that. That's a lot of soldiers, 450 within 5 minutes. And these are muzzle loading rifles. You can only get 3 rounds out per minute, but the Confederates had found this ready-made rifle pit in the Sunken Road, and they could pass up rifles. They had their best shooters in the front ranks. They even had another firing line behind them up on the opposite side of the Sunken Road. So they had, you know, not just one firing line, they had another firing line. So we'll see that when we get up there. Then the next brigade, Dwight Morris's brigade, they follow Weber's brigade. As they go right in their trace, they come up over that ridge. Same thing happens to them. So we have these two brigades intermingled, digging into the ground, trying to get some cover, trying to get some protection, getting in a very precarious position there. Then another brigade, Nathan Kimball, who had the 132nd Pennsylvania, 2 regiments on this side, 2 regiments on the other side. As they began, they don't get into the Sunken Road. The Sunken Road is holding their ground. They have D.H. Hill's division and the remnants of the other brigades that Hill had sent up here into the cornfield that fell back, which are up here near the top of the lane here, Colquitt's brigade. Plus they have some of the soldiers that Lee had moved from above the lower bridge running through town to help Jackson. So he has some of those men, D.H. Hill. Longstreet, again, is in charge of this end of the Confederate line of battle. Jackson was where we were, up on top of the ridge into the West Woods to the Potomac River. James Longstreet, he's observing and acting like a traffic director and trying to give leadership for defending the center of the Confederate line. Now, what the Confederates are praying for is that they're going to get help, reinforcements, same as Jackson got help. Richard Anderson, Confederate General Richard Anderson, has arrived from Harper's Ferry. He's ordered to move his men, close to 3,000 men, 5 brigades, to reinforce the Sunken Road. And we'll get into that a little bit more. So the Confederates are getting help. Will it be enough? Will it be in time to help them? Well, look in this direction. You see those houses there in the distance? Not too far from those houses were 4 batteries of 20-pound paired rifle cannons. 24 cannons firing 20-pound shells close to 2 miles. And they could fire right into that area to the south of the Sunken Road. Those were Union cannons, Union batteries. So, when those reinforcements began trying to assist the soldiers, the Confederates in the Sunken, they're going to run a gauntlet of artillery shells coming from that direction. Plus, the Confederates, when they drove those Union men under Sedgwick out of the West Woods, they have artillery on the other side of the Hagerstown Pike. So those Confederates are going to get hit. Well, I should say Union artillery was brought back. Let me backtrack a little bit, I'm getting ahead of myself here. There was Union artillery right where you see the visitor center. If you look real close, you can see cannons on this side. Tompkins battery, 6 cannons that were fired from that location. Got my artillery a little mixed up, sorry about that. So in other words, the Confederates, they're getting hit by artillery fire, okay? And one of the first casualties was General Richard Anderson. Again, another officer. He does survive. One Colonel Wright, the 40th North Carolina, he's on his horse and one of the shells embeds itself in the breast of the horse and blows up, blowing him off. Somehow he survives. Well, we're going to go from here, we're going to go to where Richardson kicks off his attack against the other part of the Sunken Road. So I want to show you exactly where the Irish Brigade began its attack, going across these fields right here. Everybody doing okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
How,
Okay.
how far a march from where they started to when they got here?
Well, let me go over that when we get down there. We're talking about the Irish Brigade. Can get in some sort of line of battle here, shoulder to shoulder. Okay, here we go. Well, where we're at is where the Irish Brigade, Brigadier General Thomas Francis Meagher and his 4 regiments became organized to begin their attack against Sunken Road, about 800 yards to the north. Now, early that morning, you see, let me backtrack. The Irish Brigade, part of Israel Richardson's division of Sumner's 2nd Corps, had been ordered to stay in that area around where McClellan's headquarters is located, the Pry House. In fact, it was the Irish Brigade that led the 2nd Corps down from Boonesboro through Keedysville as they began moving troops from the battle up there on South Mountain. So they had been left, they were kind of like guarding that part of the Union line of battle there where artillery was and so forth. So they had not been released. And here on the morning, the 1st Corps, Joe Hooker's Corps, they went into battle about 6 in the morning. They had been in position the night before the battle. And then the 12th Corps came in finally around 7 o'clock, but then the 2nd Corps, it's not until much later that they came into the battle. The 2nd Corps, Sedgwick going into the West Woods. We know what happened to French. French is up there, hunkered down in front of the Sunken Road. Now the Irish Brigade, Caldwell's Brigade, John Caldwell's Brigade, Brooks Brigade, 3 brigades, Israel Richardson's division, they've gotten permission to move across the upper bridge. If you know where the upper bridge is, about 3-4 miles from our location here, through the wood line here to my right, down through this lane. So they are exactly where we're at right here. Right here. Caldwell's Brigade will be further to my right, your left, over in this area there. Brooks Brigade will be behind the Irish Brigade. Now, up here, there's some high ground. From that position, they can see somewhat what was going on up there in the Sunken Road. So there's no surprise. They could see it. They can go up there and look in this direction. Meagher has himself dressed in his finest uniform. Like I said, he's a fashionista. Gold sash. He's got his British Grenadier ceremonial sword. I don't know where he got it, but he's got this British sword. That sword will be found, there's a story to this. The reason why I mention this sword will be found by a farmer in 1983 in Vermont in one of his farm fields. They give it back to the 69th New York. How it got there, I don't know. So, the Irish Brigade has its orders. Now, Meagher has this vision as to how this attack is going to be developed. He's telling his troops that we're going to simulate, we're going to copy what the Irish mercenaries did at the Battle of Fontenoy in France. Now, a lot of Irish men became mercenaries and fighting for other governments. So they found a way to make money, right? So they were mercenaries. Some of them fought for Syria, some Hungary, some fought for the Pope's army. Well, Fontenoy, they were fighting against the Brits. They were fighting for France, and they did this tremendous bayonet charge that drove the Brits off of the field. So he says, that's what we're going to do. We're going to move to the enemy. We're going to get within range of the enemy. We're going to fire 3 volleys, and then we're going to charge with bayonets. That's the plan. There's no other way to describe it. It's just going to be this brute bayonet charge. He's relying on the impetuosity of the Irish soldier. In other words, their bravery, their ability, their fearlessness. They're going to scare the bejesus out of those Confederates by doing this bayonet charge. Now, the 69th New York will be right here under James Kelly. Here, in this line of battle, will be the 29th Massachusetts under Joseph Barnes. These soldiers did not have a green flag. They were not an Irish Brigade regiment. They've been attached. Joseph Barnes. But later the soldiers said that the Irish soldiers, they treated us pretty well. And the Irish said, yeah, they were good soldiers, but they were honorary Irish. So the 29th Massachusetts, right here. Then the 63rd New York, right here, under John Burke. Colonel Burke had been wounded during the Peninsula Campaign. There was no indication, basically, about whether he had any kind of mental problem or fearlessness for being... Remember, the colonels, they had to lead by example. When the 63rd goes into battle, approaching the Sunken Road, they cannot find Colonel John Burke. He's hiding behind a haystack. He did not go with his troops toward battle. He will be cashiered out of the army 2 days after this battle. I guess he could have been shot for cowardice in the face of the enemy, but I guess that would have brought disgrace on the regiment, so they just kicked him out of the army. And then here we have Patrick Kelly with the 88th New York. The 88th New York had their chaplain with them that day, William Corby. The 69th was Dillon. They had their chaplains. Corby, concerned about the souls of his Irish soldiers there, gives absolution, absolving everyone in the Irish Brigade of any sins, as long as they did their duty. You know, if they didn't do their duty, then I guess, you know, all bets are off. But he will be galloping, the famous description of Father Corby galloping back and forth in front of his men giving his absolution. Here's a photo of William Corby there, and another chaplain, James Dillon. Corby was a professor at Notre Dame. After the Civil War, he'll become president, University of Notre Dame, for fighting Irish, right? So we have now the Irish Brigade motivated, prepared to attack. They have the roulette lane on their right. They look over here. They know Caldwell is going to come up on their flank, and they're going to approach. So what we're going to do now, and please be careful, I don't want to see anybody trip or anything like that, okay? So what I want to do is to go up through what was then a cornfield to that line of trees right there, which is where the fence was on the southern side of the cornfield. And we're going to see what we can see up there. Okay,
Hey Michael, all 4 regiments aren't in smooth bores?
The Irish Brigade had smooth bores.
How about the 29th?
Now, the 29th was a mixture.
Right, okay.
Yeah. They had smooth bores, infields. But it was out of choice. The Irish soldiers, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, they were firing 69 caliber smoothbore muskets, buck and ball rounds with 69 caliber bullet with 233 caliber buckshot. The 69 caliber weighed about as much as 9 pennies in the palm of your hand, and it was only accurate at about 100 yards.
Right.
Whereas the rifled muskets could be accurate as far as 300, 400 yards. But these soldiers, they didn't receive marksmanship training. They weren't concerned about hitting a target, or especially a moving target. The whole idea was to fire a sheet of lead toward the enemy, 3 rounds per minute, and then of course different firing commands, either one rank at a time or one at a time and so forth. But the idea is, you know, would it be better to fire like a shotgun slug toward the enemy than a bullet? There is some truth to that, you know, because most of these altercations, when they came together, you can see that at about 100 yards, that's about when one side's got to break or the other side's got to break. But not to say that at 300 yards, the North Carolinians that'll be faced off against the Irish Brigade, most of them had smooth bore as well. But it seems, though, that soon after Antietam and then, of course, Fredericksburg, they wanted to outfit all soldiers with the rifled muskets there.
But Meagher preferred this move,
He did.
right? He wanted to get within about 100 yards of the enemy line, discharge, and then go at him with the bayonet.
Right. 3 volleys, charge with the bayonet.
Right.
You've got to take a lot of losses. Okay, so be careful. We're going to head in this direction. First leg in our attack on the Sunken Road has gone through a cornfield. Lots of cornfields. There still are a lot of cornfields here. As we look in this direction, you can see that there was a nether fence where you see that row of trees right there. Now, notice over here, to my right, where I'm pointing to here, that far ridge going from right to left. So, there's another kind of steep incline there. That is where the 29th Massachusetts was behind that area. To their right was the 69th New York. The 29th Massachusetts has the least number of casualties of any regiments in the Irish Brigade. And the reason why is because they were sheltered behind that part of that low-lying ridge there. Now over here to my left, the 63rd New York, and then the 88th New York would have been further up, about where the tower is, directly in front of the tower. Now, the Union Army, Richardson's division, does not have a lot of artillery. They have those 4 batteries of 20-pound Parrott rifle cannon on the other side of the Antietam Creek. But Sumner is keeping most of the artillery up there to the north because he thinks that Jackson, they're going to renew the attack, and he lost some. He's kind of, some would say, gun shy, that I'm not going to take any more risk. I know what happened. I sent Sedgwick in there, and we lost close to 2,500 men, 3,000 men. I'm going to keep my artillery up there. But there's one battery that actually did begin arriving here, and that's Graham's battery, Captain Graham. So they did have a battery up there to the left of the tower, coming a little bit closer to us, where you see those 2 pine trees and a tree right there. So, and that's basically Richardson will begin coming and moving his brigades into battle. Caldwell was not moving at the same time as the Irish Brigade. Caldwell's brigade was on the other side of that ridge that I'm pointing to. And they were coming around to the left, around and flanking actually the Sunken Road, which was good in a way, but they were not keeping up with the Irish Brigade. Now, as the Irish Brigade begins moving into battle, Richard Anderson's reinforcements begin arriving. But Richard Anderson is wounded. His replacement was General Roger Pryor. Pryor now gets a lot of criticism. They said he did not have the ability to keep those reinforcements stabilized with direction to know how to reinforce the Sunken Road. So what happens, these units, these regiments, are helter-skelter. They're not moving in a direction, organized direction. They're going in to parts of the Sunken Road. They are moving into some of the Sunken Road where there's no room for the soldiers. So the Confederate reinforcements are losing fences so that they don't waste time getting shot up taking fences apart. Well, they didn't have the pioneering corps actually available or active, or I don't know. There was a reason why they couldn't use the soldiers trained with the broad axes. So they asked for volunteers, and one of them was this soldier from the 29th. His name was Wright, Samuel Wright. And Wright moves forward, and he will receive the Medal of Honor for what he did, tearing apart those fences. The Medal of Honor. His descendants gave us here at Antietam the medal, so that'll be in our new visitor center. It was in our new renovated visitor center. It was in the center before we started renovating, so we'll have it back. But this guy, he was shot in the leg, but he makes it back. Later, he'll be run over by a wagon pulled by mules. He'll be shot through his eye later in the campaign. He'll have typhus. This guy somehow manages to stay in the service, the 29th, until the end of the war. But he had all of these very serious wounds. Later he'll be Justice of the Peace back in the Boston area where he was from. Samuel Wright. Well, one of the Irish Brigade soldiers that they like to say, you know, like to point to, you know, as far as their courage and so forth, that the 29th was attached. It really wasn't part of the team. Well, they were Irish Brigade soldiers that day, and he received the Medal of Honor for that. All right, we're going to continue now. Again, notice the terrain here. Now, if we look over here, you see that cannon? That's where Graham's battery was. So there's 6 cannons over there. Richardson will be directing fire upon Confederate positions south of the Sunken Road, and he'll get hit by counter battery fire, and Richardson will be another general that will lose his life. He didn't die here. He'll die 30 days later. They took him over to the Pry House and set up a room for him in where McClellan's headquarters was, over there at the Pry Farm. That's now our Field Hospital Museum. And he'll die there about a month later. When Lincoln came to visit the troops, he stopped by to say some words of encouragement to General Richardson. I was reading about the Prys. They will leave the area just about 3 years after the end of the Civil War, moved to Tennessee. Then these other people bought the property and came in, and the owner of the new property, they said they would, when they did baking, they put all the pies in the room that Richardson passed because they knew the kids wouldn't go in there. Burying the dead, they found that a plowed field was much better to bury the soldiers because the ground had already been turned over. And so in the Roulette property here, close to 700 bodies were buried. Many of them close to the Sunken Road, just right on the other side of the fences and burial pits.
During the walk up here, if this had been then, would you have been under a rifle and smoothbore fire the whole time?
Because coming up, that's a good question. As you can see, think of the layout of how these regiments came into battle. Now the 88th New York, we're talking about 50-60% casualties. We're talking about the 69th down at the Roulette Lane coming up. Close to 60% casualties. The 29th, they had cover. They had that kind of low-lying area. The 63rd, floundering because they don't have their colonel. They look for who's next in command, the soldiers. It ends up that they find a captain and a major, but the major gets wounded in the 63rd. Then they look for the captain, Captain O'Neill, and Captain O'Neill says, well, I don't feel I have the authority to give orders unless somebody tells me what to do. So the 88th and the 88th New York, 63rd New York, right in the open here, you can see they have no cover at all. This is all plowed field right here. And then on the other side there was a fence about right in the center of the Sunken Road that stretched to the north, and then on the other side was just scrub grass, just kind of nothing being, no corn or anything, just open area. So as we look to the south here, you can see the Confederates now trying to bring in reinforcements. Richard Anderson, Wright's Brigade, Parnham's Brigade. As they come in through the fields here, they have to go through the apple orchards that you see there. And then there was another cornfield. See those cannons? Directly in front of the cannons was another cornfield. The cornfield actually came all the way up to the Sunken Road. There was no tor road or anything back then, so that was all open field, cornfield, all the way up there to the Sunken Road. The fence rails had been taken apart. Barricades had been placed on the rim of the Sunken Road. So the Confederates had a very strong position there for a fallback position for the Confederates. Remember, Hill had 5 brigades. The other 3 had gotten involved up there north of the Muma Farm. And as they came back, they had a place to retreat, to fall back. So the Sunken Road provided them a fallback position. But who's coming around this side here? Caldwell's brigade, John Caldwell. 61st, 64th New York under Francis Barlow, 5th New Hampshire, E.E. Cross. 81st New York. As they're coming around this end, they're going to get in position where they can actually cross perpendicular to the road and fire down in this direction. Now the Irish Brigade, they got within their 100 yards. They fire 5 volleys. Marr, he's on his horse. The horse is hit. The horse falls on the ground, trapping Marr underneath the horse. Now, some would say that didn't happen. They said, well, he was drunk, he fell off his horse. That's what the scuttlebutt was back in McClellan's headquarters. Was Marr a drinking person, soldier? Absolutely. Was he drunk here at the battle? We don't know. Had he been drinking? Probably. But I don't know how to put this. Everyone drank. It was just assumed you had your whiskey ration. When anybody went to the Irish Brigade they went to the Irish Brigade to celebrate St. Patrick's Day. I mean, it was a drink fest. And they had all sorts of activities. Horseback races, horse races, capture the greased pig, foot races, all sorts of things. They said one of the officers actually died not from wounds, but from one of the horse races during St. Patrick's Day. So Marr, he's carried off the battlefield. He's carried off the battlefield. Now, Richardson is observing what's happening to the Irish Brigade. The Irish Brigade is just basically getting shot to pieces. They went into this action with over 1,000 men. Only about 500 will survive without any wounds. Almost 50% casualties here. So what does Richardson do? He pulls some of the regiments from Caldwell. Instead of continuing flanking the top of the road here, he has them do a right flank and get behind the Irish Brigade. And then going through their ranks, and the Irish Brigade retreats back to where they started their attack, close to the Roulette Barn anyway. So the Irish Brigade, you can't say they really actually got into the Sunken Road. They had lost so many soldiers that as far as a fighting unit, they had to be replaced by another regiment. So the 61st and 64th New York, though, under Francis Barlow, 29-year-old young officer, able to move these combined two regiments to get into position to flank the top of the road. Not so much here, but a little bit more, a little bit beyond the fence rails, but they're able to at least fire down into the Sunken Road. Now the Confederates, again, they're hoping to get reinforcements, but there's no room in the Sunken Road. When they're flanked, many of the North Carolinians, 2nd, 4th, and 30th North Carolina, they capture close to 300 prisoners. So actually when Caldwell's regiments begin flanking the road, that's when the Union is able to push those Confederates out of the road, and they retreat back toward the Hagerstown Pike and the Piper Farm, which you see right back down here. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we're going to walk down the Sunken Road. We're going to get down to the intersection there, and then we'll finish up down there, okay?
Is this actually where Richardson was wounded, or is that just...
Well, he was wounded over here. I'm glad you brought that up.
a little cannon?
Yeah, about where you see that cannon. Now, on the other side of that tree was private property, 1987. And this fella, who was a relic hunter, metal detector kind of guy, got permission. And he's running his metal detector through there, and he's the one that found the remains of 4 soldiers. Now, these were not intact bones, these were small bones. But they found rib cages, and 1 rib cage, and inside the rib cage were 3 bullets, lead bullets. They found rosary beads, they found chaplets, they found brogans with bones still in the shoes and the brogans. The 88th New York was in this area, so there's this kind of assumption that they were Irish Brigade soldiers from the 88th New York. And they were reburied after they did their studies and analysis and so forth. The archaeologists came here from Washington, D.C. They were reburied in the National Cemetery. So if you go into the cemetery, the front gate, and you go to the left, you'll see a monument, or a grave marker, I should say, as to that's where the remains, those 4 soldiers were buried. They're what was left of them, their bones. Okay.
I think about whether Marr was drunk or
What year were these 4? Okay. Well, the Confederates, you know, when they came in here in the morning of this battle, D.H. Hill, he had 5 brigades, but he sent 3 of those 5 up to the cornfield. So Robert Rhodes and his Alabamians stretched their line of battle from up here, close to the Muma Farm lane, coming towards us. The 26th, the 12th, the 3rd, the 5th. The 6th Alabama was right in this area here, right next to the intersection with this lane that goes down to the Roulette Farm. This was here during the battle. The 6th Alabama was under the command of John Brown Gordon. I just had his photo. There he is, John Brown Gordon. After the Civil War, he'll be a U.S. Senator and Governor from the state of Georgia. But here he's commanding the 6th Alabama. By the end of the war, Gordon will be leading the Confederates into Appomattox for the surrender. He's a general. He had no military experience prior to the Civil War, but he was what you'd call a born leader of men. And so he'd risen through the ranks, but here he's got the 6th Alabama right there. Now here, the 2nd North Carolina under Charles II, there's Charles II, 2nd, 14th, 4th, and 30th, stretching their line of battle up in this direction. Say they had been able to fend off these attacks made by French's division, and for the most part for Richardson's division. They had received reinforcements, but things began falling apart, mainly due to the ability of Caldwell's brigade to get in position and fire down from another direction into the center of the Sunken Road. When that happened, when they were able to maneuver on the high ground and fire from that direction into the ranks of these North Carolinians, that's when it began to change. This became a death trap for these Confederates. Now, the 6th Alabama at one point had tried to counterattack. They had come up from behind their cover and pushed in there, but there was an inability to get everyone to be able to move at the same time. They might have moved, but they can't, the Alabamians, the 6th, they can't be out there by themselves. They need support on their flanks. And that did not happen. So they had to come back. As Gordon is trying to get his men focused, he gets hit in his lower right leg, in his upper right leg, and in his left arm, and then his left shoulder. The next bullet goes through his jawbone, comes out the side of his head. He's crawling on his hands and knees through the cornfield behind the fences here. He collapsed in his hat. He wrote a book about his experiences, reminiscences of the Civil War, he says. He said, I would have drowned in my own blood if it hadn't been for the Yankees' kindness to put a hole in my cap to let the blood drain out. Because as he collapsed in his hat. As he gets carried to safety to get tended to for his wounds, eventually his wife will find where he's at, join him. He's bandaged from head to toe, his face, his arms, his leg. She's shocked. She doesn't know quite what to do. He says, behold your husband. He says, I've been to an Irish wedding, he says. So anyway, Gordon, he's out of action now. His replacement is a soldier Lightfoot, Colonel James Lightfoot. I got to take more of that. What is it, Predigen, to get my James Lightfoot. Lightfoot reports to Robert Rhodes. He says to Rhodes, I'm getting flanking fire, what to do? Well, I'm thinking Rhodes says, well, you don't know what to do? Refuse to the right. Move your companies that are on this side of your firing line and return fire. Refuse to the right, he says. Well, he comes back, he says to the 6th Alabama, he says, 6th Alabama, attention, about face, forward march. That's the wrong order. When they heard that, they took off. Then the 5th Alabama, then the entire line of Alabamians retreat back toward the Piper Farm and the Hagerstown Pike. Rhodes doesn't know quite what happened. He didn't give the order, but that's what happened. So, as the remnants of those soldiers and from Weber's brigade Kimball's brigade, Morris's brigade, they can see that this part of the road has been vacated. They move into the road and start shooting up from this angle. And then you have the Barlow and his two 61st, 64th New York. They're firing from that direction. And then you still have soldiers over here firing from that direction. The Confederates now in this death trap either surrender, shot on the spot, or run for their lives back toward the Piper Farm. The Irish Brigade has been relieved. Now Longstreet is back here. Longstreet's trying to stop this disaster. E.P. Alexander says the future of the Confederacy, the demise of the Confederacy was in sight. E.P. Alexander, this Confederate officer. Because at this particular point, if the Confederates, Longstreet's part of his line of battle, if they had been the Union Army able to knife their way into Sharpsburg, they could have turned the flank and rolled up the flank both sides. They would have been right going through there. But Longstreet is able to pull forces from this direction. He has a counterattack. 3rd Arkansas, 27 North Carolina come in on the flank. D.H. Hill picks a musket off the ground, leads a counterattack, 300 men. They're able to stop the Union Army from getting any further than the Piper Farm. So this will become, for all intents and purposes, a no man's land by the afternoon. Now Richardson will be replaced by Winfield S. Hancock. And Hancock will order all of the soldiers to move back to positions right here. And so by the end of the day, the Confederates are still holding on to Sharpsburg and the Piper Farm, and the Union Army is up here. Now I've read after the battle the following day that Marr is able, as he recuperates, able to form some sort of a truce with some of the Confederates and able to try to get the wounded and their dead to recover their fallen brothers in arms there. This photo was taken by Alexander Gardner, and you might envision like a tripod such as this, but pointing the lens directly up in this area here. And you can see up here on the rim of the road, Union soldiers getting ready to drag bodies to burial pits in the Roulette Farm. Alexander Gardner and his assistant James Gibson took the first photos of soldiers dying on a battlefield before they were buried. They were put on display at Matthew Brady's studio in New York City and also in Washington, D.C. A newspaper columnist saw the photos as he went in. People lined up on Broadway to get into Brady's studio to see the dead of Antietam. That's what they said. And he said in his newspaper column, he said, Mr. Brady, even though Gardner worked for Brady, Mr. Brady's done something to bring home to us the terrible reality and earnestness of war, he says. If he's not brought bodies and laid them on our dooryards and along our streets, he's done something very much like it. But there's one side of the photo, one part of the photo that they missed, and that is the broken hearts. He said broken hearts cannot be photographed. So the names of the soldiers that died, the casualty lists being put up for the public to see, grew longer and longer and longer. Folks, I want to thank you, but before you leave, you know this is still, we're celebrating St. Patrick's Day. So, what do you have at the end of a journey, at the end of a rainbow, but what? Pot of gold, right? So we have some souvenirs I'd like to pass out in memory of, I have green and gold. So if you would like to have a memento of your freezing day here, please stop by. Thank you so much for being part of my tour today. My water must have dripped on them. I got green and I got. So good luck to you then. Yeah, but it's a very helpful website there. And plus seasonal also gives medical coverage. I used to do it. I was just on some we can get into that. So you got that going. Now veterans, they get